Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, warshippers of all ages, welcome back to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and let's keep cracking with quarterly reviews. See what I did there? That's right. We are finally into the first quarter of 2024, trying to still play some catch up here. So what I like to do, if you're new to the video series, maybe you haven't watched one of these before, I take a few minutes and we briefly talk through what was in each patch in this particular quarter, and then we fall back and we take a quick look at kind of some global server stats, server population numbers, which, again, they're not what Wargaming has. They have much better numbers than we have access to, but I try to take what we have access to and boil it down to something that is quantitative, that kind of gives us an idea of server health. So let's start off talking about January of 2024, update 13.0. Started to get a look at the new American aircraft carriers, right? This is the branch that runs Independence, Yorktown, up into Essex. I remember when they announced these ships, I was kind of pretty meh, let's say. But in the end, I think this line of ships actually came out pretty good. Now, I'm only still on Independence, and Independence is kind of rough. But Yorktown, I've seen a lot of good players, a lot of good games in Yorktown. The flexibility you get out of the mix of tactical squadrons and that aerial smoke drop is actually really kind of cool. So I think Wargaming hit upon something very interesting here with a carrier class that is not exclusively focused on damage. And one of the things that I'd like to see, I'm just spitballing here while I'm doing this video. I hadn't planned on doing this. Like, they're talking about all these changes to carrier spotting. I would actually like it if what we think of maybe now as like the strike carriers, let's think of it that way, or like the traditional Ranger, Lexington, and Midway, they had those restrictions on spotting, but maybe the support carriers could retain the older spotting rules, just as a little perk of not being so damage focused. They're there to support the team. That might be interesting. I might suggest that to see if they'd be interested in testing like that. But I really like this branch of ships. I haven't played them a whole lot, but I think the concept is nice, and I think it's a much more interesting iteration of the carrier in World of Warships. The Dockyard event that began at the end of 2023, continuing to run into this patch for Tier 9 Italian cruiser Michelangelo. There was a bounty hunt event in this patch. They've really upgraded the mechanics of this over the years, right? This is something that began on NA a whole bunch of years ago. They would do these little bounty events. People would sign up on the forums. It all had to be managed manually. It was a bloody nightmare, right? You talk to some of the guys that worked manage that on the back end. All the way back to Super Nico Power, Fem, and Hapafodder, and some of the guys that work for the company. In fact, I think they were still doing it manually even when Bogsy got there. But in the last few years, they've automated this process a lot better. They can do these more regularly, and there's a lot more, a lot more is handled on the server side rather than manually, and it's really, really nice. This was a nice change to the team screen, right? You can now see ship loadouts, ship configurations, and I think even captain skill builds, maybe not captain skills, but certainly, what consumables and everything a ship is running in the team screen. Now, you can't see it for opposing ships, and you shouldn't be able to, but you can see it for friendly ships. For literally, 8.5 years up to this point, you had to have a mod to see this. Hey, is the guy next to me running radar or hydro or radar defensive fire or whatever the choices? What were his consumable choices when he had choices? You couldn't tell until he pushed buttons or if you had a mod. Now you can see all of that in the loading screen, and that's a really, really, really handy add. USS Alfred came out earlier this year, Tier 9 American Destroyer, a Fletcher-class ship. She was Fletcher number 6 into the game, I believe. For my money, this was a giant miss. Everything that I want to enjoy about playing Fletcher, Alfred kind of is not amazing at. So as a Fletcher enjoyer, I don't particularly care for Halford, but if she's your bag and you love that ship, hey, more power to you. There needs to be a fan of every ship out there. Every ship in the game deserves some love. We got unique upgrades for the top end of the German Sparcruisers and a Dutch cruiser line. Nice to see. Some kind of HoloLive collab. I saw this in the patch notes and went, I vaguely remember this. Some kind of Asian VTuber thing, I think it ran for this patch. And then the Commonwealth Cruiser branch, I think, I say enters testing. It might have been continuing to test. I don't remember precisely anymore. Going on into February, we hit 13.1. And a lot of big changes in this patch. Big changes in this patch. For starters, Wargaming took a very comprehensive revamp approach to submarines and anti-submarine warfare. A lot of ships got buffs to their airstrike ranges. They added sub-surveillance to the top end of the Japanese and Italian cruiser lines. And they also made some signal changes to Sierra Bravo and X-Ray Papa Uni 1 that would benefit submarines to give them some better signal options, which was nice to see. There's a lot involved in this change. The one change that I still think they need to make, the one criticism I will continue to throw at them in terms of ASW design, is the low end of destroyer ASW is too weak, right? The people at the bottom end of the ASW scale, the Pan-Asian destroyers, I think the German destroyers, and I think even the Russian destroyers, they're bad. And they need to be better. If you can finally, if the submarine screws up, he's out of position, you work into where you can get good depth charges on him, that should be the end of his game. But very commonly, a tier 10 submarine can survive that, and that's so silly. Some changes to the permanent camo system in this patch, rejiggering what you could and couldn't do in terms of they were adding more options of things you could add as permanent camos. It's February. It's time for the Chinese Lunar New Year event we get every year. Usually some fun crates, some premium ships. The occasional unique captain comes out of that. Airship Escort came back in this patch for a spell. The American Carrier early access continued. Tier 10 Italian battleship Sicilia was added to the game, added to the Research Bureau. This is a ship I don't even think I've ever played. Like, I remember when they added this, and I looked at it and went, huh. And then I've never even gone to my press account to kind of figure out what this thing is all about. I really should sometime, just to kind of figure out what the ship is. I've seen it. I've seen people play it. I think I've even seen it in some competitive games. I feel like I saw it in a couple of the EU King of the Sea games that I got to watch, but I will not pretend that I know very much about it. Now, February also brought one of the stranger events that we've seen, right? Wargaming did this giant Creatorverse collab with, I think, about 5 or 6. I think it was 6, content creators on YouTube and Twitch, but it wasn't people you'd ever heard of, right? This was all paid collab. They went to these folks. They tried to leverage their communities, I think, to round up some new players. They got them added to the game as captains and all this sort of thing. And the concept is really, really cool. But at the same time, there was a whole lot of questions asked about, well, why these people? Why are you putting people in the game that don't already play the game, that nobody's ever heard of? And there were people arguing for, guys like me and Zath to get at it. And I was like, okay, guys, look, Zath and I, compared to some of the folks out there, are pretty small time. We've been doing it a long time, but we're not that big. I log into the game all the time, and I do not expect people to know my name. It's not a thing. It's not a thing I care about. And so I saw a whole lot of people like, oh, you should have done this and everything. And I was kind of like, nah, look, this was very clearly a marketing department decision. Somebody in the marketing department went out, found some medium to large sized creators, negotiated some deals. Maybe they got good rates. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. Obviously, this was a paid promotion, right? And they put more eyeballs on the game. That's their job, right? You have to remember that the community contributor program is not. We're kind of loosely tied to marketing in the sense of that's sort of kind of the lens I feel like you have to look at the program through, but we don't report to them, right? There's nobody from the marketing department that I know of that's actively involved day to day in running and managing the CC program. So there's no reason that they would have thought to talk to anybody in the CC program when they did this. I was not bothered by this, but a whole lot of people were. It was really weird. Now, in February, there were a ridiculous number of balance changes. And now when I say ridiculous, I am not going to read this list. I mean, just look, this is just the buffs, right? Some of the stuff that stuck out to me a little bit as I kind of read through this list and things that we're still kind of grappling with a little bit. That very first one, Hayate, right? Hayate got a main battery reload buff, and they moved her reload booster out into a separate slot. I think those are both really nice changes for the ship. I think Hayate still has her own set of quirks and issues, but those things do make her a little more playable, in my opinion. I think Kiev getting a health pool buff at tier 8 in the Russian destroyer line was a big deal. When I saw that buff, I remember pinging Zath going, "Are you serious?" And he was like just beside himself with glee, right? Because he get like that is his ship. He gets along like a house on fire with that boat. The Haberovs change was one that I completely missed. Right when I read this, I went, "Oh, they gave Haberovs like the really good repair party now, like the British repair party." Yeah, they did. And with that 50 millimeters of armor, that ship that ship must be crazy now. Like I should put more time into wrapping my brain around how that ship plays. Sevastopol is a ship that I've been dunking on since they basically released it, but they actually improved the mechanics of her repair party. It's still a very slow burn heal, but it's about 30% faster than it used to be. So that's still an improvement, right? The heal doesn't last 20 seconds, it lasts, 60 seconds. So you still have to plan ahead. You still have to like, oh, I'm going to be under sustained fire. I just started taking damage. Hit the heal now, don't wait. But it is better than it used to be, right? So that's a ship that now I look at and go, maybe I should put a game or two into that and try it out. I had no idea they'd buffed Leone, right? Which needs all the help it can get. That poor boat is just a complete train wreck. I didn't realize they'd buffed Split and Katsonis, right, in the EU Destroyer, the new EU Destroyer branch that I still look at it and go, I don't know why these ships even exist, but here we are. So, a lot of buffs, and then of course, anytime there's buffs, hey, there's nerfs, right? Ryujo, it feels like, gets nerfed about once a year. Pretty much once a year since the carrier rework, Ryujo has been reliably nerfed. They keep coming back to those torpedo squadrons. They cannot seem to get them balanced at tier 6. And I think we're almost to a point where, Ryujo, in my opinion, for a long, long time has been, you would look at that ship and go, yes, that's the best tier 6 carrier. I really, truthfully feel like Furious gives that ship a run for its money now, right? The British carrier line is kind of not really well regarded because the top end ship, Audacious, right? Not amazing. And the tier 8 ship, Implacable, is arguably just misery to play because of the matchmaking she gets with the penetration on her bomb squadrons. But Furious, down at tier 6, Furious is actually quite solid in the tier. So it's interesting to me that they keep kicking Ryujo in the teeth all these years later. Some nerfs to Annapolis. So we're still nerfing Petropavlov's surface detection all these years later. Colossus needed a nerf to her rockets. Those rockets were stupid. I watched people take this ship and just mercilessly go snipe the enemy carrier way more times than I can count. Like, I get that gave the ship an identity, but come on. Like, that was just silly. Duncan and St. Vincent getting a little bit of touch with the nerf bat. Nothing major, but a little bit. Bayern needed the nerf. As much as I like Bayern, the skip bombers were silly. What you could do to mid-tier destroyers with those things was just not okay. So I'm glad they did that. But anyway, there's a complete list, and there's all kinds of big balance changes about 6-8 months ago. Heading into March, we hit the Pinata Hunt event, which is, I think, still one of the better well-regarded events Wargaming's run in a while. This was a neat thing. Certainly the camos are popular. A lot of King of the Sea teams I saw running those goofy, green, pistachio and pink colored camos. They were kind of fun. Commonwealth Cruiser Branch came into early access in this patch. And of course, when that happens, the previous early access event ends and then comes into full release, and that's the alternate American carrier branch that had been in early release for a while. This was a big one, very well received by the community, actually, right? Back in March was when they made all the big changes to how the shotgun mechanics on submarine works, basically just nerfing the crap out of torpedo damage inside of 3 kilometers. So the sub couldn't just surface in front of you, smack you for 50 or 60K, submerge under your hull, and laugh while he did it. Now they have to be at a reasonable attack distance. I say reasonable, but not point blank, right? They can't be at point blank range and murder you anymore. That's not really. If you're very very low health, okay. But like if you're at full health, the idea that somebody's going to shotgun you from full health to dead at point blank range is pretty much no longer a thing. Now, that's not to say that good submarine players can't still execute these kinds of attacks. They can. They just have to do them from farther out. And that gives you at least the opportunity to react, maybe push your damage control if it helps clear the ping, whatever. Makes them, give you some time to react with your rudder, maybe change your speed, whatever. You have at least some more reaction time. So this was a good change, fairly welcome. And some minor balance tweaks in this patch. Again, looking at that submarine changes, they basically, all of the alternate torpedoes, which were the mostly, I think, I forget if it's the dumbfire or the homing ones. I think it's the dumbfire ones are considered the alternates. They got a damage buff, which I like. I still feel like submarines should not have homing torpedoes. I still think the homing torpedo mechanics are dumb. Um, and then the Brits only have acoustic torpedoes, so they got a lesser buff. That's like 5%, whereas everybody else got like 15% to their dummy torps, their dumbfire torps. And then U-190, the top end of the German submarine line, got some torpedo range buffs. All right, so let's look at server populations, guys. A quick reminder, the way I do this, if you look in the video description, you're going to find a link to a website where you can see the the server populations of all the servers except China. They get polled on a regular basis. So if you look at it over the course of a week, you'll see all the ups and downs, right? Server logins very low in the morning, population's very low, sun's coming up, people are going to work, and then as the course of the day goes on, population goes up, usually peaking in the 7 to 8 p.m. local time range, depending on the time zone of the server, and then slowly going back down until the wee hours of the morning. That's a very common visual what you see when you look at those population graphs. So what I do is I take the average daily population, right? The every single day has a low population number and a high population number. I'm going to take right in the middle, the difference. What was the average or the mean for the day? And I'm going to take that number over the course of a full quarter. What was the average daily population of the server over a 90-day period? Okay, a full quarter. That's what we're looking at as we go forward here. So as we look at NA, right, we've kind of been seeing, we've talked many times, the big COVID high of 2020, the long steady drop as things sort of kind of got back to normal. We usually get these little bumps either in holiday seasons, okay, lulls in second and third quarter, very common. Server population down here back in second quarter of 23 as the lowest it had ever been in 7 years, right? You have to go all the way back to second quarter of 16 to find a number that low. But it's refreshing to see that since then, a slow, steady uptick. Not amazing, right? We're not getting big bumps here. These are still not, in my opinion, not great numbers, but at least we're not going the other direction. So I'll give it that. One of the reasons that these numbers bother me, okay, and we've talked about this before, but I'm going to keep banging this drum because I think it's the most important reason that server population and server health is a big deal in World of Warships is matchmaking. If you've played Warships for a while, usually I'd say 2 years plus, you've probably played enough regularly. You've probably played enough Warships to know to be able to log in on the evening, look at the server population, and know that when you're below 10,000 concurrent users, matchmaking struggles. You will get far more bizarro, weird matchmaking anomalies below 10,000 concurrent logins than you will otherwise. I don't know why that is. I just know that it's true, and the problem has only gotten worse over the years, right? Over the years, go all the way back to the beginning of the game, almost 9 years ago now. Every single quarter, every single year, we've added more and more and more and more matchmaking restrictions, right? Carrier mirroring, tier mirroring, ship type mirroring. We've added a whole new class of the game in submarines. Every time you add these restrictions, matchmaking becomes more and more and more and more challenging, and then you need a larger and larger pool of players to successfully generate what most players would feel like a good matchmaking result. And these kinds of server population numbers, in my opinion, make that very, very challenging. If you've played on NA in the last year, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, okay? Now, blessedly, if you're on EU, you don't really have these problems, right? Your population continues to be solid in the, I'd say, what we got here, 12,500 on your average dailies. And you had a low point third quarter of last year, came back up for Christmas, and you held there, which is nice. You held there into first quarter. Again, the winter months, fourth quarter, first quarter, tend to be good months in Europe. More people stay indoors, right? Less outdoor activities. Obviously, second quarter 20 for COVID being the anomaly in this graph. But the reality is all the way, if you go all the way back, right? Very commonly, all the way back to 16, 17. Fourth quarter, first quarter. Fourth quarter, first quarter. fourth quarter, first quarter. So there's always an uptick, and we're seeing it here. It's still good to see, though. EU remains very healthy, at least from a matchmaking perspective. Like, there should be plenty of players to keep Matchmaker behaving correctly over there. Now, Asia is, they had their big, they were already on the way up before COVID. COVID was a huge boon to them. They were able to retain some of those players for a while. Now, here we are in 23 and 24, kind of backsliding a bit, but blessedly not as bad as we were back in 17 and 18. In my opinion, I don't play on Asia. I've never even logged into that server. So maybe somebody in the comments who wants to talk about it can give me their experiences. But like, these numbers, in my opinion, are still a touch on the low side for healthy matchmaking and good and quick matchmaking turnaround times. Now, the Asia server also has the added quirk of carrier has always been more popular on Asia than any other server in the game. So you probably get reliably more carrier and submarine games on Asia than any other server as well, is my guess, right? I'm actually, that I sit here and talk about this, I should roll up an Asia account and go scope this out sometime. I'd be really curious. But yeah, so Asia, typical population, slightly ahead of NA, right? I'd say comparable, but still a little ahead. But I suspect if you play on Asia, you are probably struggling with some of the matchmaking quirks and the bizarro, ridiculous queue dumps that happen on occasion. This slide is just the previous 3 graphs all smashed into one. I like doing this so you can see how each of the servers compares to each other. This graph used to also have Russia on it, but since RU is now run by Lesta and not Wargaming, it's the little company divorce they did last year, a couple of years ago, I've taken that graph out of here. So obviously EU still running top, NA Asia kind of trading places along the way here. Asia running slightly ahead, but honestly, since probably, early 21, each of these servers has been, well, I'd say probably more like late 22. They've been relatively comparable in terms of server population. If you take all of the graph above, take these and you total them up, this is what you get. This gives you, again, the non-Russia, non-China. I should be more specific, but we have no way to get data for the Chinese servers. That's not a thing. Public data for the Chinese server is not available. So this is all the servers that are not Russian. If you add all of these numbers together, it generates this slide. So again, we're not nearly as bad as we were in 16, right? The game definitely had some low points in 16 and 17, kind of retaining interest over those summer months after the game was brand new. We're not quite there, right? We're still above that. So that's encouraging. But I still feel like, again, I've highlighted the matchmaking problems that I think are happening on NA and I suspect are also happening on Asia. That's my biggest concern with this. If you take all the first quarters the game has had, all the first quarters the game has had, this is what they looked like. Now, first quarter used to be very well received, right? You would have the Christmas events used to run all the way well into first quarter, usually all the way like to the middle of January. That would usually drum up population. And of course, it's still winter, right? So if you're on NA and EU, less opportunities to go outside, more opportunities to be spending time indoors in front of the computer. And you can see that here, the first 3 to 4 years, I guess 5 years of the game, all very, very solidly in the 40+ thousand numbers. But the last 2 years, definitely below that, right? And I think, we've talked about this before, a combination of the decisions. I think some of it is the fatigue with the game, and I think some of it is the decisions that the development team has made along the way that have actively pushed players away, right? The last one of these videos I did, I had a little Twitch clip in the back end of it where I basically said, it feels increasingly like Wargaming treats the new players like a piggy bank and the veteran players like an inconvenience. And I still feel that way. It frustrates me a little bit, right? Because the veteran players, in my mind, are the people that are going to help do some of the marketing and selling your game for you. But go find a veteran player of Warships right now. Look, in your clan, maybe you know somebody at work, and ask them honestly if they would recommend this game to a friend. I think you would get a whole lot of negative answers. And that's really sad, isn't it? Right? I mean, for a game that's so beloved by so many history buffs and nerds, this should be an easy recommend. It has no competition. Again, I talked about this last video. War Thunder is the naval aspect of War Thunder is not competitive with Warships. It's not even the same game, not even remotely. So there's no competition, and you still can't retain players to some extent. That's kind of sad when you think about it. The last slide I like to look at is short-term trends. And on the downside of COVID, everything has been kind of slowly on the downslope for a while. This is just the last 18 months, right? So I take this slide here and I chop it off and I only show you the last 6 quarters basically, right? The last 18 months. And then and that's kind of what you get. NA and EU, I mean, more or less holding steady, down a little bit, but not catastrophically so. And I would say EU's probably about the same. I mean, I'm not wargaming. My suspicion is if they, they'll have better numbers than we can ever get. And their numbers also include financials, right? The spending that the players do. That's what they are probably more focused on than logins to some extent. But I mean, financially, if this keeps the game healthy, then the game's going to stay running, right? Now, the question is, will the game remain fun for the players? That is the challenging and far more interesting question for the chair that I occupy as a player and a community contributor, and not somebody whose livelihood depends on World of Warships. And yeah, I'm not too optimistic about that. I'm really not. I wish I was. I would love to be. There was a time I was very optimistic. But over the last 3 to 4 years, there's been so many, kind of this long string of like head-scratching decisions made. I mean, everybody points to submarines, but that's not really the only one, is it? It's not really the only one, is it? So, yeah. Anyway, guys, there's our look at first quarter 24. We're now into early September. I'm going to get second quarter out by the middle of the month. And then as we head into early October, we'll get all cut up. And I'll get you guys caught up with third quarter of 24 in the first couple of weeks of October. Okay? Thanks for watching. Be safe. Wash your hands. I'll catch you next time.